Welcome to the session of data entry process. In today's session, we will cover introduction to this data entry process, understanding the workflow, receipt, tracking, what are the different strategies, the considerations while doing the data entry, what are industry best practices around it, some guidelines, finally, post data entry, the kind of review to be done, and lastly, the distinction between paper and EDC data entries. The purpose of data entry process is to ensure that data are reliable, complete, accurate, of high quality, and it is suitable for statistical analysis. The data entry process encompasses the efficient receipt, tracking, entering, cleaning, coding, reconciliation, and transferring of data. A number of factors should be considered when choosing a data entry process, such as the skill level and the training that has been given to the personnel, and the amount of time that is allocated for data entry. Now, data entry can either be performed by data management team, as in cases of paper studies, or it could be done by the sites directly, as in cases of the remote data capture and the electronic data capture studies. With the electronic data capture systems, the traditional data management roles change. In most cases, the site personnel will do the data entry. They also have the capability to run the edit checks and make data updates to resolve the discrepancies. When data managers are not able to make edits, they need to remotely guide the site personnel through data cleaning processes. Now, these processes may take the form of automated checks, which are built into the computer system, or may operate through queries entered into the clinical data management system. When a study is EDC or a paper-based study, the functionality of the tools, the design of the study, and the skill sets of the staff should be carefully considered. Workflow processes for EDC studies will change as per the CDMS software that has been used. Therefore, these are highly dependent on the software developer as well as the organization's SOP. Let's understand the data entry workflow. So, although specific processes and steps may vary between organizations and studies, the flow of data should follow a logical, prescribed path. Now, the general workflow of data entry processes for studies using paper CRFs is presented here. And at each steps, there are the various choices that are available. All of these choices are described in the further slides. However, when the data are received, it should be first tracked, or it has to be logged. Then it has to be entered. After the entry, it has to be cleaned, and then it has to be subjected to various rigorous audit inspections or quality control. Now, to determine which choices are made to each stage of the workflow, this has to be decided by the organization, and therefore the organization should have standard operating procedures and data processing conventions. Data receipt. Now, data receipt process will vary across the clinical industry. Data could be received through fax transmission, regular emails, could be with express delivery, which has a tracking mechanism, or it could be private couriers. It could be hand delivered by the monitors. There could be an electronic web-based entry, or through other electronic means also, such as SFTP, that the data can be transferred. Now, regardless of the data acquisition mechanism, the process by which the data are received, confirmed as received, and even made available for data entry, this should be documented in the DMP. There are also standard operating procedures should be in place to ensure that the blinding of the subject identifying information remains, especially such as the name, address, subject initials. unless collection of this data has been authorized in the informed consent protocol as well as the local regulations. Otherwise, the blinding has to be maintained while doing this data transfer. Ensure that a process is in place to quickly identify also if there are incidences of the violation of the data privacy conventions and laws. If the CRFs are missing, then CRF missing reports should also be prepared for both paper and EDC-based studies to facilitate identifying forms that have not been received. Now, CRFs can be tracked by some of the means. The first one is the electronic data capture, computer-aided page checking, which results in a very higher integrity and efficiency than the manual process. Now, regardless of how the data received, procedures should facilitate timely, high-quality data processing. Expected visit date reports can be programmed into most reporting and tracking systems. By this, we will be able to follow the subject's progression throughout the clinical trial, as well as even predict when the subject will have their last visit. Paper tracking. Now, tracking may occur on an individual CRF basis or as per the modules. So ideally, when all the CRFs are tracked, data that is recorded on the paper forms are recorded in one of the two following fashions. Okay. The first one is the independent logging. In this approach, this involves personnel manually registering that study data and the data that has been received. Now, the data receipt may be recorded in the CDMS, although there could be other tracking mechanisms or systems in place as well. In a dependent logging, what happens is this is more of an automatic approach. So tracking happens automatically once the data has been entered in the CRF. So the good point about this approach is that it eliminates an extensive and expensive manual process of tracking the CRFs, replacing it with an electronic process in which tracking is a cost-free result of data entry. However, there is a trade-off that in any of the steps between the receipt and the entry, if the receipt dates are not accurate, then in that situation, tracking will become a problem. So for a reliable receipt dates, data should be entered when received with little to no backlog. The third one is the tracking third-party data. Third-party data such as laboratory data will be received electronically or on paper forms. Documented procedures should be in place to track data for each external data that are the various external data that are required in a study. Imaging and indexing CRFs. To provide added security and flexibility for paper-based studies, CRFs may be imaged and stored electronically in addition to storing the paper forms. CRFs should be scanned using well-established formats such as the PDF. The electronic files must be secured so they are only accessible to the authorized and trained personnel. File naming conventions should be very strictly followed, and repository of the CRF images should be indexed so that it allows to locate a specific file very quickly. What are some of the common data entry strategies? Data entry processes should address data quality needs of the study. The following ones is double data entry with a third person adjudication. Here, two people independently will enter the same data and a third person will resolve the discrepancies between the first and the second person's data entry independently. In a double data entry with a blind verification, again, two people will independently enter the same data and both will remain unaware of what the other person is entering. If the second person, when he enters the data and enters a value that differs from the first person, the operator will be warned by the system that there is a discrepancy. After this warning, the second data entry person, who is also responsible for verification, he must carefully examine the entry against the source and then determine what should be the appropriate entry before saving it. With this data entry strategy, the second entry person value will override the first person's entry value. In double data entry with an interactive verification, two people will independently enter the same data. The second data entry person will resolve the discrepancies that happens between the first and the second. But here he will also be aware of what the first person is entering. He will not be blinded to the first person's entry value. Single data entry with a reviewer, where one person enters the data and the second person will review the data against source. There could be another one which is not recommended, but only a single entry is being done and the data is not reviewed. The data ideally will be reviewed subsequently by the data management team. The next one is the optical character recognition. This is a software which recognizes the characters from the paper forms as well as the faxed images, and then the data is directly fed into the database. But because this is software recognition, there has to be a manual review of whatever data has been entered by this software to ensure that there is accuracy of the data. What are some of the considerations to the data entry? There should be written procedures describing data flow, data entry, data processing, and quality levels to be maintained. The process and procedures should provide certainty to ensure the data from the source document is captured from appropriate analysis. Employees are trained on working on systems, procedures, guidelines, reference documents like medical abbreviations so as to minimize any data entry errors. These documents should also be available to the personnel until the study closes out. All the employees have the required access as per their roles and responsibilities. Organizations usually should have a list of users to be maintained, which describes which user has what kind of access to the database. Organizations should also have quality checks to ensure that the data entered is accurate per the source document and it has been reviewed correctly by the DM team. A standard data entry convention also enables consistency of the data throughout the study. For example, if the study captures an entire date of birth, but the privacy laws of certain participating sites, the local laws of those sites, do not allow this complete date of birth collection, then based on the internal conventions that has been decided, there could be a default value for date and month can be added, and just the year of birth from the sites can be collected. This default value could be something such as 1st of June or 1st of Jan, followed by the actual date of birth, the year of birth of the subject. Automatic saving of the data by the system should be discouraged during data entry. This will allow the data entry operator to go back and check his work before he submits it. Paper CRFs and EDC screen parameters should be identical as much as possible to avoid any ambiguity or errors of data entry. Screen design should be such so as to minimize any data entry error. For example, use of coded checklists or selection options be applied, such as radio buttons and checkboxes. There can also be very clear instructions on the CRF screen of what should be selected. For example, if multiple checkboxes, multiple options can be selected, or just a single option selection is required. What are some of the industry best practices? The first one is address the purpose, characteristics, and complexity of each study in data entry training sessions, including but not limited to the review of protocol, scope of work, identification of critical variables, usually such as what are the subject identifiers, the primary and secondary efficacy variables, safety information, etc. Verify in a test environment, that is before the data entry system is placed into active use, that the entry field functions as they are planned. Example, like the date field will only accept dates. Drop-down list will only contain appropriate values. Okay. In some organizations, true test data pages may be entered for an entire case report form, while in some other organizations, they will focus on just certain few aspects of testing. This is not to be considered as a substitute of software validation or edit check testing. We have to train the team on completion guidelines to understand how data is ideally recorded, and on data entry guidelines for any specific data entry directions. To provide the site, sponsors, vendors, and study team members with timeline expectations for data receipt, tracking, and entry, turnaround time of the data queries, when the file transfers are expected, and the different database deliverables. The tracking mechanisms should be detailed for receipt of CRFs and other forms containing data to be entered. Tracking ensures that there is a control of the received records. Identification of any missing records is easier, and it also facilitates the archival of records at the end of the study. Quality control and assurance plans should be in place to address collection and review of the primary and secondary safety data. During active data entry, metrics and trends will help ensure that a stable and desired quality levels are consistently achieved within the study. A comprehensive change control process should be developed and maintained, which acts as a guidance to the team in cases of data updates. What are certain data entry guidelines? When either paper CRFs or an EDC system is in use, detailed data entry guidelines should be provided to all the data entry staff. All the data entry personnel should also be provided with written documentation that should be received and understood by these people. Data entry guidelines may be a part of a broader user manual, particularly for studies using EDC systems. Both data entry guidelines and user manuals may take the form of paper documents or an online manual. The following topics should be considered for inclusion in the data entry guidelines or user manuals. Contact information of individuals available for troubleshooting of the computer problems and the hours when this help will be available. Instructions or conventions describing how to enter the data, delete data, respond to queries. Instructions or conventions describing how to enter data for single or multiple record panels. Reminders to users that a date time stamp and a username are recorded as a part of their audit trail for every record. The audit trail may not be visible depending on the system that they are using. Even if it is not visible, the audit trail must be readable by the inspectors and the auditors. This has to be clarified to them. Information on computer system security. Instruction on proper computer shutdown procedures to prevent any loss of data. Instruction on data entry personnel explaining appropriate actions when edit check triggers or reconciliation windows for double data entry system appears. Data review, data cleaning refers to a collection of activities used to ensure the completeness, validity, and accuracy of data. Data cleaning activities may include manual reviews of data, computer checks that identify inaccurate or invalid data using ranges, missing data, protocol violation, consistency checks, certain descriptive stats that reveals an unusual pattern in the data. Early in the data, early in the study, data should be reviewed from several subjects at each site to help detect the problems with the data entry screens, which are not functioning as per the expectations, or because there's this lack of sites understanding or compliance to the protocol. So following are the data cleaning activities to be performed: verifying that the raw data has been entered accurately in the computer, that the code list is valid, numeric ranges, there are reference ranges or normal ranges that get applied to the numeric values on submitting the values, identifying and eliminating any duplicate values, and the system flags if any critical or mandatory fields has any missing values. We're able to identify if the codes and the values are invalid. Usually there should be a warning or a pop-up message from the system indicating this. And also there should be a tracking mechanism which ensures that all CRFs that have been received were entered. For multi-forms related data, such as CONMEDs, related data, all the related data is received and they are entered. For example, if AE page is received, all the CONMEDs that were taken for each AE is also received. CRFs should have investigator comments for data anomalies. For example, if certain data is not falling within the protocol expected criterias or fails the logic of the checks, there should be an explanation why this discrepancy is the way it is, and it cannot be further rectified, and that it has to be acceptable as is. We should also ensure that the data which is entered are logical and consistent across the CRFs. That is, the way dates are reported, it should be logical and consistent. It should not be UK in one format and then US in another format, which completely changes months by their use. Okay, this could be just one example of logical data entry. Likewise, if it is required that height has to be written, has to be reported in vital signs page at every visit, ensure it's the same height that gets reported. Confirm inclusion of guidelines which are detailing the reconciliation of critical data, such as those that are mentioned here. Then there could also be range checks that could be designed to identify statistical outliers. These are values that are physiologically impossible or outside the normal variations for a population under study. Consistency checks can also be designed to identify potential data errors. For example, checking the sequential order of dates, corresponding events, missing data noted to exist elsewhere. Checks designed to identify protocol violations should be very closely monitored to allow timely actions that can be taken. A site can be monitored and investigated when stats or other checks indicate substantial differences from other sites. So in terms of performance, one site is not doing, is far different from the rest of the sites. Certain data cleaning distinctions. After entry and review are complete, flags or notes are generated outside the database for a paper-based study. And these are submitted in the individual data clarification forms. During data entry, and review by data management, these flags and notes may be compiled. The CRAs or the monitors can also create these during the monitoring. For data entry systems, such as remote data capture application, which allows only entry of data, flags or notes are identified by monitors, and they are treated similarly to paper. That is, data clarification forms are issued. For EDC systems, which shows data discrepancies on the screen in real time, this allows site to action on these sooner. Sometimes EDC will close these discrepancies automatically as soon as the data entry is done or the entry is corrected. But sometimes the screens will only allow manual closure of discrepancies. This is to allow a thorough review of the data change before the issue is closed. With respect to listings, cleaning listings differs from cleaning discrepancies, flags and notes that because what happens is this will require a higher level of review by monitors, coders, statisticians, safety team, lab specialists. So when the review is being done on these listings, that's when all that information, all the data discrepancies are collated, and then a periodic data clarification form is sent to the site. However, for EDC, it becomes easier because there are program checks, auto checks that can be created to resolve the discrepancies. Then there are also listings that are created where external data such as labs, once they are received in-house, they are compared against the EDC data, and then the resulting listing will give the discrepancies, which are then queried within the EDC system in real time. Now, data may be changed as a result of data cleaning procedures, in which case the site and data entry, data center or sponsor must retain a record of all such changes. Data changes should be recorded and documented by a fax or an original site signature acknowledging the new data. This documentation is usually accomplished using a query or a data clarification form. In these cases, the site is expected to keep a record of the change within their study records. There could also be certain other updates, such as data cleaning conventions under some circumstances may be used. These cleaning conventions specify the data that can be modified without a site's acknowledgement. These are called as the self-evident corrections. And examples include appropriately qualified personnel correcting obvious spelling errors, converting values when units are provided, or there could be missing identifiers where the true values are obvious. Now, because the site must have a record of all the data changes, the site will also receive and maintain a copy of such versions of data conventions. Although it is strongly discouraged, situations do occasionally arise where telephone conversations with the site are utilized to authorize a data change. If this occurs, these changes should be clearly documented by the site who has authorized the change and the data center representative who was talking with the site. In this way, a record of the conversation and the authorization will exist at both the locations. In any case, any data change authorizations must be documented in writing, and they should be included in the study file for audit and inspection. Now, the different types of data changes that can happen in a paper-based and an EDC study. Entry changes or errors that can happen in a paper-based is system or process changes. They will be reflected in the data entry work instruction. Then changes will be reflected in the audit trail. And authorized changes are submitted by email and or phone. A hard copy has to be created for patient folders, both at the site and data management. So all the changes should be a part of our study file. For EDC, however, when changing the data, the EDC system will usually ask the user the reason for change. The reason for the change will be actually a part of the system's audit trail. For non-site personnel, data entry work instructions or conventions should be used as a documentation. Data clarification form updates. A hard copy of this DCF, which is approved by the site personnel, will be kept in the corresponding CRF pages at the site file. And because it's a DCF, which was issued by the DM team, it will also be a part of our DM file. In EDC, this becomes easier because queries are generated and they are a part of audit trail. So no additional filing is required as the EDC system captures all of this. Here in paper-based self-evident corrections, they should again also be documented. A self-evident correction instruction that is created for the study is also shared with all the parties involved in data handling. Here in EDC, self-evident corrections becomes a part of your electronic audit trail. So obviously with the audit trails, username and the roles, it becomes very easy to understand if it was a site personnel or it was a sponsor CRO personnel who was making these changes. Site-initiated changes should be documented through a manual data clarification form. So if site is also initiating any data changes proactively, then that has to be also requested through a data clarification form. This could be resulting in a data update, or it could be simply an explanation or a new update over an existing data. In EDC, all of that becomes a part of the audit trail because the new information, whatever it is in the form of comments, in the form of data updates, gets captured in the system's audit trail. With this, we come to an session's end for data entry. If as a CDM personnel, we are allowed or we are asked to perform the data entry, going through the organization's SOP is very critical. Understanding the system functionality with respect to data entry, what kind of responsibilities are being extended to us, whether self-evident corrections are applicable, all of these aspects are to be clarified before beginning the data entry. Thank you very much.